If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. That saying sums up the entire history of NASCAR pretty well. As a crew chief or engineer competing against 30-some other cars, most with millions of dollars poured into research and development, and world-class drivers behind the wheel, oftentimes pushing the car to its illegal limit isn't enough because there will certainly be a few or many others who get away with going a little or a lot beyond that limit. NASCAR knows just as well as any other motorsport that cheating has always and will always be prevalent from top to bottom on the grid. And while they have developed robust pre-race and post-race inspection systems over the years to detect any deviation from the legal dimensions, heights, and weights, the race teams who spend all day thinking outside the box and searching for any aerodynamic advantage they can will always remain one step ahead. Thus, the sanctioning body is left with a difficult decision to make when the car that rolled into victory lane to the cheers of thousands of fans and had passed all pre-race inspections with flying colors is found to be completely and utterly illegal. That's what happened in the first ever officially recognized Cup Series race back in 1949 at the original Charlotte Speedway. Originally, it was Glenn Dunaway who conquered the 3/4 mile dirt track with a gap of over 3 laps to second place Jim Roper, but it was discovered after the race that Dunaway's car had illegal rear springs. The modifications made to them were clearly intentional and significantly improved the car's stability through the turns, leading NASCAR to disqualify Dunaway and give Jim Roper the title of the first Cup Series winner. Dunaway's car owner Hubert Westmoreland didn't take the ruling easy to say the least and attempted to sue NASCAR in court for $10,000, 5 times the amount of the first place prize, but the case was thrown out. Throughout the 50s, 60s, and up through 1970, it wasn't uncommon to see drivers get disqualified from races, most often for blatantly illegal car parts or part modifications, or for various safety or rule infractions within the race. After Dunaway's win was stripped, there were 7 more instances of Cup Series winners being disqualified within that time frame, although Fred Lorenzen was able to successfully appeal his in Martinsville in 1966. The first winner and driver in any finishing position for that matter to overturn a disqualification, Lorenzen was given his win back 3 days after the race after proving his slightly oversized fuel tank had been purchased directly from Firestone, an official supplier. There were a couple times as well where NASCAR unintentionally made up for a disqualification a while after the race. In 1954, at the Daytona Beach road course, Tim Flock was originally declared the winner before it was found that he broke the rules by soldering the butterfly shaft onto his carburetor. Flock claimed that he only did it to prevent it from falling off, but NASCAR still considered it a competitive advantage and didn't budge. This came in the midst of a heated feud between the Flock brothers and NASCAR founder Bill France, which had seen Flock previously be stripped of his 1950 Modified Division Championship after the season was over for competing in a rival event, and be disqualified after winning the 1952 modified race at Daytona Beach for having makeshift wooden roll bars that NASCAR officials had approved of before the race. The third controversial disqualification, this time in the Grand National, now Cup Series, was the final straw for Tim Flock, who vowed never to race in NASCAR again, until his return later that season. In 1955, Flock went to Daytona Beach as a spectator with no plans to compete on a regular basis. But when the hotshot new car owner Carl Kiekhaefer showed up to the track with a fleet of Chrysler 300s that outpriced most other teams of that time, Flock accepted a $40,000 offer to get back in the driver's seat. It was there on the beach that the first wrong was righted for Flock, who was vaulted from second place to first after it was found that Fireball Roberts had altered push rods. Towards the end of the year, Flock was gifted another win, this time when Jim Reed, who had lapped the field, was disqualified for illegal cylinder heads. But as for the bigger picture, Flock won an astounding 18 total races that year en route to his second Cup Series championship, a season which put to rest all his grievances with NASCAR, at least for the time being. The next season at Palm Beach Speedway, Jim Reed was caught cheating for a 3rd time within a span of 6 races and was discredited of his original second place finish. But so was the original and first-time winner Joe Weatherly, and so the win was given to Herb Thomas, the driver scored in 3rd in the sport's first double disqualification. Similar to Tim Flock, Joe Weatherly also ended up on the winning side of the post-race drama when in 1960 at the half-mile dirt track at Wilson Speedway, he was moved ahead of Emmanuel Zervakis to score his second win that season, after Zervakis was caught with an oversized fuel tank. Just like Weatherly a few years back, Zervakis would have been a first-time winner, but he had to wait until the next year at Greenville Pickens to officially win his first Cup race. After the double disqualification at Palm Beach, there were 2 instances of 3 or more drivers getting disqualified from the same race. First, in 1958, in the only ever Cup Series race at New Bradford Speedway, the 3 local drivers of Dean Layford, Squirt Johns, and Emery Mahan were all sent to the back of the finishing order for reason of illegal engines. Each of them had a fuel-injected engine as opposed to the permitted carbureted engine. But because there was a short field that day, NASCAR gave them permission to race before caving to the complaints of other drivers afterwards, and not only taking away their finishing positions, but also all their prize money. For context, none of the three drivers were in contention for the win at any point. The inaugural World 600 at the new Charlotte Motor Speedway tried its best to top that controversy in 1960, when 6 drivers were disqualified, all for improper pit entrances. A race which the Charlotte News stated will go down in history as the only race ever run in which drivers were forced to dodge track blemishes more often than other cars. The opening race of the paved 1.5 mile track was a total disaster for multiple other reasons, but especially for both father and son Lee and Richard Petty, who reportedly finished 5th place and 4th place respectively, prior to being robbed of all points and money from that race. They, along with Bob Wellborn, Paul Lewis, Junior Johnson, and Lenny Page, had all technically broken one of the most highly emphasized rules that weekend. That was to not cut through the dirt to get to pit road. Yes, dirt, not grass, because along with the track surface falling apart throughout the race, grass had not yet been planted in the infield in time for the world's longest closed-circuit race, and NASCAR feared the cars driving through the dirt would create enough dust to blind the cars behind them. However, most of the rule breakers didn't cut the course intentionally, but either because they had spun out or were avoiding other crashes and decided to keep going through the dirt to their pit stall, rather than getting back on track and going all the way around to the proper pit road entrance. As far as the points implications, Richard Petty, who came in runner-up that year to Rex White, still would have finished a ways back regardless of the disqualification. Anyway, once NASCAR entered its so-called modern era in 1971 with its new title sponsor of Winston, condensed schedule, and elimination of dirt tracks, the number of disqualifications fell off significantly. From 1949 to 1970, the sport's first 22 seasons, there were 40 DQs, but from 1971 to 2018, the first 48 years of the modern era, there were only 16 DQs, and only 14 were in points-paying races. Rather than outright disqualifying, NASCAR typically opted to penalize drivers and teams via both fines and points penalties that would aim to disincentivize cheating as much as possible, as in almost every circumstance, there would be no point in winning a race if it came with no money or points. From a fan perspective, NASCAR also stated that they wanted fans to go home knowing the person who they watched take the checkered flag first had actually won the race. Nevertheless, disqualifications were still enforced on an inconsistent basis for severe part manipulation, some straight-up illegal parts, and other obscure instances of cheating or recklessness. Of note, nearly half the disqualifications in the modern era prior to 2019 were for illegal carburetors, and only 3 winners were disqualified in that time frame, all from the Busch Grand National Series in the 90s. Back in 1992 at New River Valley Speedway, when NASCAR's secondary series was still primarily short track focused, Jeff Burton became the first of these 3 winners to be disqualified when it was found that his Philmar Racing Oldsmobile had an illegal rear end assembly. Burton was moved to last place, and instead Bobby Dotter was credited with the win, which turned out to be the only win of his Busch Series career. A few years later, in 1995 at Michigan, the DAJ racing entry driven by Dale Jarrett was sent to the bottom of the leaderboard after a dominating performance, in which Jarrett led 89 of 100 laps and put all but 4 other cars at least 1 lap down. In that case, officials discovered an illegal carburetor modification on Jarrett's car, and so Mark Martin, who originally finished a distant 7 seconds back, inherited the win. That race, which also went down as extraordinarily odd for going caution-free from start to finish, broke the series record for the fastest race ever run, with Jarrett averaging 169.571 miles per hour. Both Jeff Burton and Dale Jarrett's disqualifications stirred up a bit of controversy because there were multiple other instances of winning cars failing post-race tech but keeping their wins, albeit with some type of fine and/or points penalty. It was seemingly up to NASCAR's own discretion rather than any clear rules on when to disqualify or just hand out penalties. But the most controversial call of the 3 was certainly the final one, when in 1999 the officials took away Mike Skinner's win in Atlanta for an unapproved cylinder head modification, only that the modification wasn't illegal. The Team Yellow racing crew added a fin with material they carved out from the port floor to improve airflow through the cylinder, or in simpler terms, they only changed the shape of a legal part, and thus exploited a gray area in the rules rather than breaking one. That said, the team had grounds to appeal, and a few days later, Skinner's win was restored in NASCAR's first successful disqualification appeal since Fred Lorenzen's in 1966. However, NASCAR refused to pay them the winner's purse, and neither Skinner nor Team Yellow could really do much about it. Interestingly enough, that win turned out to be the only of Mike Skinner's Busch Series career, and had his disqualification stood, Dave Blaney would have inherited his first win. Instead, Blaney had to wait until 2006 at Charlotte to score what would be his only win in the series. But anyway, after NASCAR's botched call at Atlanta in 1999, there was never another disqualified winner. That is, until the playoffs presented a new problem. Throughout all of NASCAR history up until 2014, a win was just a win, a major accomplishment in and of itself, but one rendered unprofitable and damaging to a team's shot at the championship if they were caught cheating and subsequently given fines and/or points penalties. However, with the win and you're in clause in the playoffs, teams actually had an incentive to cheat to their first win of the season, because as long as they stayed in the top 30 of regular season points, they'd be locked into the playoffs. Assuming their infraction wasn't too severe, their fines would be outweighed by a guaranteed top 16 points finish, and their points penalties would be trivial once the playoffs began and the points reset. Surprisingly, there weren't any playoff-eligible winners caught cheating in the first few years of the playoffs, at least not enough to warrant a single fine or points penalty. But those peaceful times came to an end in 2016 following the final race of the regular season at Richmond. After finishing in third place, the Furniture Row Racing car of Martin Truex Jr. failed post-race laser inspection and was penalized 35 points, in addition to crew chief Cole Pearn being fined $15,000. In any other race, that points penalty would have been a major hit, essentially dropping Truex to a 36th place finish. But because the points were reset for the playoffs after that race, it made no difference at all. So one of the loopholes was finally exposed, and seeing that it had the potential to be replicated in each round of the playoffs as the points were reset after each round, NASCAR implemented the infamous encumbered finish rule within the week. The new rule stated that for certain significant post-race inspection failures, NASCAR would take away all playoff benefits that the offending team would have earned at that race, including walking into the playoffs or advancing to the next round of the playoffs in the case that they were the winner. Nevertheless, Furniture Row Racing wasn't shy to test the waters the next week at Chicagoland, where Truex won the race and promptly failed laser inspection again, but not by enough to constitute an encumbered finish, only by enough to get a small points penalty, which would be utterly meaningless because he just locked his way into the next round. Meanwhile, 12th place finishing Jimmy Johnson, who failed inspection by about the same margin as Truex, would have suffered a major setback as he still had to race his way into the next round. Realizing how big of a hole they were already in, NASCAR for once decided to stop digging and just toss out both Truex and Johnson's penalties. The rest of the 2016 season escaped further controversy on the matter, but it wasn't long into 2017 before the encumbered finish rule became a hot topic once again. The most notable encumberment that season, far and wide, came in the spring at Richmond for race winner Joey Logano. After starting in the back that day due to a transmission change, Logano was able to work his way up to the front and take advantage of a slew of late race restarts to pick up his first win of the season. But in post-race inspection, officials found that the Team Penske car's truck-trailing arm spacer and pinion angle shim were not flush with each other on the rear suspension, a violation they determined to be significant enough to give Logano an advantage in the turns, and to warrant an encumbered finish. In addition to his win not locking him into the playoffs and his 5 playoff points being revoked, NASCAR dished out an additional 25-point penalty, suspended crew chief Todd Gordon for 2 races, and fined him $50,000. So despite officially winning the race, Logano fell from 4th to 5th in the points and still had to race his way into the playoffs, which he ultimately failed to do that season. In one of the biggest season collapses in recent memory, Logano finished outside the top 20 in 10 of the 17 remaining regular season races, and missed the playoff cut line by 3 positions. Later that season, Denny Hamlin also made all the wrong headlines when his weekend sweep at Darlington was found to be enhanced by the same rear suspension modifications as Logano had. Both Hamlin's Cup Series and Xfinity Series wins that weekend were encumbered, and speaking of Logano again, his second place finish in the Xfinity Series race was also encumbered, also because of the rear suspension. It definitely wasn't uncommon for bushwhackers or Cup Series drivers competing in the lower series to have illegal cars. In fact, they were among the most common offenders, as they had a lot less at stake. Faulting back to Hamlin, his Xfinity win earlier that year in Michigan was encumbered as well due to a splitter modification, and staying on the Joe Gibbs Racing train, Kyle Busch's Xfinity win at Atlanta was encumbered after failing height inspection. But in 2018, the trouble stayed mostly relegated to the Cup Series and to Stewart-Haas Racing's Kevin Harvick. Although NASCAR was more or less bullied by fans into getting rid of the encumbered term, the penalty itself stayed the same going into the new year, and Harvick was hit with it twice, first following his win in the spring Las Vegas race, and then after his win in the Texas round of 8 playoff race. At Vegas, the second of his 3 consecutive wins early on that year, the 4 team was caught with a modified rear window brace, and at Texas, where Harvick would have locked himself into the championship 4, they were discovered to have made modifications to the spoiler. Both of these penalties drew more attention than normal because not only was Harvick the winner both times, but he absolutely dominated both races, sweeping the stages and earning perfect 60-point days. Especially in the modern Cup Series, if a driver's that dominant, it's inevitable that a lot of fans will get bored and watch something else, so whether or not Harvick's illegal modifications made a difference or not in his dominance, or the overall on-track product, NASCAR was none too pleased to see 2 boring races end in controversy. Meanwhile, Harvick, who was still positioned above the playoff cut line following his 40-point penalty from Texas, finished in the top 5 the next week at Phoenix and qualified for the championship 4 anyway. Throughout the whole modern era, fans and media had spoken out to some extent each time a winner was penalized, calling for NASCAR to take away wins rather than just handing out penalties, but those calls went mostly unanswered, as NASCAR's philosophy was to have fans leave the track knowing they saw the winning team, and post-race inspection failures were pretty uncommon anyway. But that all changed at the start of the 2019 season when NASCAR announced the return of disqualifications in all 3 national series. Having developed an improved post-race inspection system, NASCAR was no longer required to bring cars back to their R&D center later in the week to determine penalties, but instead could complete the inspection process at the track and confirm the legality of the winning car and any others they decided to inspect within a few hours of the race. NASCAR Executive Vice President Steve O'Donnell said, quote, "I think for us, we're really looking at a total culture change. We've been through a deterrence model where we've really worked with the teams at the track and probably been more lenient than we should in terms of the number of times teams can go through inspection and fail, and there's almost incentive to try to get something by NASCAR, so we really want to reverse that trend," end quote. The list of newly disqualifiable offenses included many L1 and L2 infractions that previously constituted an encumbered finish, and those that Kevin Harvick, along with a few non-winners, were caught with the previous year. Since the return of full-fledged disqualifications in 2019, they have been enforced 45 times as of this recording, making up almost 45% of total disqualifications in NASCAR history, and those numbers will likely have risen higher by the time you're watching this. For the rest of this video, we'll take a look into the most impactful disqualifications since the start of the 2019 season, primarily ones that stripped away wins or impacted a driver's shot at the championship. The first DQ handed out in 2019, and the first in all of Truck Series history, came at the expense of Nice Motorsports' Ross Chastain. That year, Chastain took on the busiest schedule in the garage by attempting to run full-time in all 3 national series, with Premium Motorsports and Cup, JD Motorsports and Xfinity, and Nice Motorsports and Trucks. Originally, he elected to earn points in the Xfinity Series, where he made the playoffs the year before, but after finishing top 10 in all of the first 6 truck races with the previously unproven team of Nice Motorsports, and then scoring his first win in the 7th race at Kansas, he took a bet on himself and changed his points eligibility to the Truck Series. Essentially resetting himself to 0 in both series, Chastain would have to win one of the 8 remaining regular season races to make the playoffs. It was a tall task for even the greatest of drivers, but just a few weeks later, it appeared that Chastain had cashed out with a convincing win at Iowa. However, it wasn't long at a post-race inspection when the officials reported his truck was too low in the front, and by the new rules, declared second place Brett Moffitt as the official winner. All still ended up well for Chastain, who, with a bigger chip on his shoulder than ever, took the win at Gateway the very next week and wound up finishing second place in the points standings. The stories of the next 2 disqualified wins are less dramatic, but should sound pretty familiar, as later in the 2019 season, Denny Hamlin was disqualified after winning the Xfinity Series race at Darlington, and early in the 2020 season, Kyle Busch was disqualified after winning the Xfinity Series race at Texas. Both the drivers and their Joe Gibbs Racing team had received encumbered finishes in the series back in 2017, but due to the new rules, this time they wouldn't go down as the official winners, but rather the official last place finishers. After Hamlin's car was found to be too low in the left front and too high in the right rear, Cole Custer inherited the win at Darlington, and after Busch's car was similarly found to be too low in the left front, Austin Cindric was credited with the win at Texas. Hamlin and Busch stayed out of trouble in 2021, but in the first year of the Gen 7 car, they made Cup Series history for all the wrong reasons at Pocono. In a race titled the M&M's Fan Appreciation 400 to honor the final year of the long-lasting partnership between Busch and M&M's, NASCAR discredited Hamlin and Busch's 1-2 finish and gave the win to the third-place finisher Chase Elliott, who did not lead a single lap. What egregious infraction did Joe Gibbs Racing commit this time to warrant the first disqualification of a Cup Series winner since 1960? Reportedly, both cars had 2 extra pieces of clear tape, measuring 2 inches wide, 5.5 inches long, and 0.012 inches thick, placed ahead of both front wheel openings and underneath the car's wrap. No matter how insignificant it sounds, both cars carried illegal modifications that were intentionally and precisely placed to gain some sort of aerodynamic advantage, and they were caught with their pants down. Since then, no other Cup Series winners have been disqualified, but 2 more wins have been taken away in the lower series, both of which happened this season in 2025. In the Truck Series opener at Daytona, Parker Kligerman picked up his first win at the legendary racetrack, driving for the small Henderson Motorsports team, but the feel-good story was shattered when his truck was found to be too low, and the win was given to Corey Heim instead. Then later on, the highly anticipated Xfinity Series returned to Rockingham. A race plagued with crashes was made even messier when the winner, Jesse Love, was disqualified for a rear suspension violation. As it turned out, the battle for the win came down to the wire between Sammy Smith and Parker Retzlaff, who each thought they were racing for second, with Smith getting the better end of it. While the vast majority of disqualifications since 2019 have been issued to non-winners, some of them have stood out in particular for costing drivers a shot at making or advancing in the playoffs. In the 2020 Coca-Cola 600, Jimmy Johnson, who had missed the postseason for the first time in his career the year before, put together a solid second-place finish and earned a total of 46 points prior to failing the optical scanning station. He lost all but a single point after getting moved to last place, and when the dust settled at Daytona in that year's regular season finale, Johnson missed the playoff cut line by 6 points to Matt DiBenedetto. In the 2022 Xfinity Series race at New Hampshire, Landon Cassill also originally finished in second place, following his best overall performance that season. But he, along with a fifth-place finisher Noah Gragson, were disqualified, both for failing heights. While Gragson had already locked himself into the playoffs long before with a win, Cassill was dependent on pointing his way in, but at the end of the regular season, he wound up 5 points shy of Ryan Sieg. It was a tough pill to swallow for Cassill, who that season had received his best opportunity in over a decade to drive for Kaulig Racing, and it surely became even tougher when his cryptocurrency sponsor Voyager, which made the whole deal possible, went bankrupt the following offseason. Cassill has not returned to drive since. Although there have surely been some butterfly effects and indirect playoff implications as a result of other disqualifications, those two stand out as the only ones to have directly prevented a driver from making the playoffs. But just last season in the Cup Series, the Bank of America Roval 400 laid witness to one of, if not the most significant disqualification in NASCAR history due to its championship implications. When the checkered flag waved at the Charlotte Roval to conclude the round of 12, the cut line showed Tyler Reddick 4 points ahead of Joey Logano to claim the final spot. It was a hard-fought day for Reddick, who soon after winning the first stage collected major damage due to a checkup ahead of him and ran near last place until his crew was able to make extended repairs under the next stage caution. In the final stage, he clawed his way from the back, position by position, and finally cracked above the playoff cut line with less than 10 laps to go. It was a comeback of the ages for Reddick and quite an entertaining end to the round, but for Logano, it was a bitter defeat after earning 17 stage points but drifting back to finish in 8th place. He needed a near-perfect day to punch his ticket into the next round, but came up just short. But within a few hours of the race, it was announced that both Reddick and Logano had made the round of 8, and by a relatively large margin. The Hendrick 48 of Alex Bowman, who won the second stage before dropping back to finish a substandard 18th place, was already having a rough day, but had earned enough points to land a couple positions above the cut line. That was until his car failed post-race inspection for reason of being underweight. NASCAR reportedly gave the team a few chances to fill the car up with fuel and water, but it remained considerably under the minimum allowed weight. Fans quickly pointed back to the replays when on just the 4th lap, Bowman misjudged the final chicane and ran directly into a tall curb, launching his car with all 4 tires off the ground for a brief moment. It was speculated that the rough landing might have knocked something off the car, but considering the intense detail of the post-race inspection process, and that the Hendrick team never filed an appeal of the disqualification, it is probably safe to say that all the parts were found intact on Bowman's car and that it was simply underweight. Fast forward a few weeks when Logano was crowned the 2024 champion amidst new levels of backlash against the playoff format, as the Penske driver recorded the worst overall stats of any champion in NASCAR history. It is also incredible to think that for a while he was eliminated not from the Championship 4 or round of 8, but from the round of 12, and he only continued onward as a result of another driver getting disqualified. Currently, that is the entire history of disqualifications in NASCAR, or at least the history of all the rules surrounding disqualifications, all the disqualified winners, and most other notable disqualifications that caused major controversy or had some type of direct effect on the championship battle. As always, when taking on a topic this big by myself, there's a chance I miss some interesting or important disqualification stories, especially in the earlier years of the sport, so let me know down in the comments if you guys know of any more. But that is all for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and if you did enjoy it, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more videos just like these. And until next time, peace out.